Okay, hi everyone. Good morning. This is the first video I've recorded in a minute, and I certainly didn't want to be doing it in a situation like this. But as I messaged yesterday evening, even though we won't be meeting today and won't be meeting again this semester, sadly, I did want to provide everyone with some review, content and something to refer to as you're preparing for the test on Tuesday. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to record this and hopefully I can do it in about 15 or 20 minutes and then I'll post it and send it around. And I'll also going to be sending a Zoom link so that if you wanted to sort of drop in during our class period, just to, I don't know, say hi, ask some questions, chit chat, just, I don't know, have a bit of FaceTime. Even if it's not to ask questions about the test, if you want to just sort of pop in and say hello or goodbye. I'm frustrated that we won't get to be together to say goodbye. I've really enjoyed this semester with everyone and being back in the classroom with students, my undergraduate students, for the first time in quite some time. And I'm super frustrated right now because I've been trying to advocate for coming back to campus more, even though it's a hassle and even though I hate dealing with the traffic and all the rest of it. And now after yesterday, good luck. Good luck trying to get people to want to come back to campus in a way where it feels vibrant and alive and just so sad and aggravating. Nevertheless, we will try to be resilient. That favorite word of our dean in the college, resilient. We will try to, you know, embrace this moment in terms of the care that is required and the support that is required while also not letting it pull us down, right? And so for me, it's important that we finish the work that we've begun this semester and we don't let something like this steal that from us, right? We've all put in a ton of effort and we want the outcome that we have labored for. So I'm here to, listen to you and to help in any ways that I can. I don't have much leverage or wiggle room left in this semester in terms of allowing for late this or that. So, but reach out if you have a particularly challenging version of what we're all dealing with right now, and we'll see what we can do. But I do want us to, forge ahead and to finish this work. I'm going to further simplify this test, as you'll see as I'm going through it. So let me just do that now. I'm already eating up time. So the study focusing instrument, I did update this a little bit this last week and made a few changes more toward the end. So, in terms of the big picture, we are looking at the material since the midterm. We did a 2-week chunk on the Renaissance period, early modern period. The key figures there are Descartes and Vico, and they're contrasting figures, right? So Descartes is the hard objective logic, right? And he's the one who sort of represents the new dominant way that truth was being pursued in the modern period, is through objective, scientific, logical, rigorous, application of objective standards, right? Whether they be logical or scientific. And then Vico represents more of this contrasting view, and you can think of Vico more in that kind of Isocratean tradition of, we need, yes, all that new stuff is brilliant and lovely, but let's not forget the wisdom of the ancients in terms of embracing imagination. And human beings are not just these rational reasoning creatures, these basically kind of like early robots, they were almost thinking. So Vico has a more holistic conception of people and what they respond to, and it includes the passions and the imagination. And so I have a hard time containing my enthusiasm for Vico. So there's those two. And then we did also talk about Erasmus, and that's important in terms of that style piece, right? Like rhetoric became style in that early modern period, and Erasmus represents that nicely. We also looked at Pazan and Woolf on the kind of the changing nature of influence and the role of women in this whole context, or lack thereof, right? And be thinking about the kind of the changing social structures a little bit there. There won't be a ton of questions on that chunk. The priority would be Vico, Descartes, Erasmus, and then Pazan and Woolf. All right. Then, of course, we jumped into the 20th century context, and the first person we looked at there was Perelman, and we want to be thinking about Perelman in the Aristotelian tradition, very, very much Aristotelian, because it's about argumentation, and Aristotle is the argument person, right? And so Perelman's work is really an updating of Aristotle for the kind of the modern era, right? It's looking at persuasive interactions that happen in contexts or genres that exceed Aristotle's three genres of deliberative, forensic, and epideictic, right? So for Perelman, let's expand how we think about the occasions for rhetoric, where it happens, when it happens. And so it's a richer, more nuanced, but still fundamentally Aristotelian project. After that, we looked at Burke. Burke is super important. The definition of man is the key essay there. I've worked through those clauses. Oh, another notification from campus safety. Boy, they just keep coming. Yeah, Burke, definition of man is the key essay there. There's a video you can consult. We talked through it. The paper was based on this. Hopefully you're feeling okay about Burke. Just thinking broadly about Burke, this is the person who really reinvented rhetoric in the 20th century. The biggest reinvention of it in terms of a robust social phenomenon, as opposed to this marginal stylistic thing from the modern period. But Burke really expands rhetoric's domain, where it is, what it is, right? So the fact that he's interested in not even just language in general, but the symbolic in general. So that includes not just words, but like images and shapes and colors and the broadest possible spectrum of thinking about mediation, communication. He's thinking all of that is potentially rhetorical. All right. And so this business of, literature as equipment for living is, let's start with Proverbs. What do Proverbs do? They give us little bits of practical wisdom, situated practical wisdom. That's what rhetoric does. And so he expands from Proverbs out to, I think, poems, to all of literature. And then you can keep going. All of art you can think of as rhetorical in the ways that it provides us with, think about Christmas movies right now, right? Like, do we watch Christmas movies in the summer? That would be weird. Right, but they provide that sense of that they fill you up, right? They do some kind of work. Maybe it's not true, maybe it's not right, but it provides something sort of medicinal and practical. And so Burke was really interested in the ways that language and the symbolic and the aesthetic in general, so art, culture, so many different things around us are rhetorical and have influence, and we can talk about them as having rhetorical influence. And so he's super important. Now, between Burke and Foss and Griffin, there was chapter 11 in Herrick, and that's the chapter where Herrick talks about the postmodern kind of phenomenon. That's tough stuff, and we didn't have, I think I had, that was either when I was in DC at the conference or right before Thanksgiving. We lost both of those class periods. And that discussion was meant to happen there. And so I'm actually going to remove all of that chapter 11 stuff because it's really tricky. The stuff from Foucault, Derrida, all that, it's really important, and it's conceptually worthwhile to kind of be familiar with these ideas, but I don't feel like just asking you to read that chapter and then never talking through these ideas is fair. In terms of turning around and testing you on them. So I'm going to go through the test. I'm going to get rid of stuff on Derrida and Foucault and whatnot. If you wanted to bring that in terms of the bonus questions, by all means. But that seems like a kind of no-brainer in terms of let's just sort of skip over that. Unfortunately, but that was a nice setup for the Foss and Griffin essay, because that, of course, is a critical look at rhetoric's own tradition, right? And so here you have the first kind of feminist orientation to what rhetoric is and what it does, right? So all of that stuff in that chapter, Foucault, Derrida, Lyotard, meta-narratives, power, all that is the kind of the intellectual context for that invitational rhetoric essay. I think we talked that one through pretty well. I think you guys all seem to understand the argument pretty well. It's not that difficult conceptually. It's basically let's not think about rhetoric only as change, because change implies control, dominance, right? Trying to change people's will, trying to change their thoughts. That's an act of aggression, essentially. You can think of it. instead, let's think about rhetoric as understanding, right? And maybe persuasion is part of understanding, or maybe there's persuasive outcomes, but they're more interested in understanding as the like goal of rhetoric. Now that involves a different kind of setup in terms of how we think about the relationship between speakers and audiences, or sources and receivers. But of course, there's the three values of imminent value, there's self-determination and equality, and those matter for that conception. So we had a really good conversation. I always have a really good conversation when I teach that piece because it is provocative, right? And it's really sort of like challenging the dominant traditions of rhetoric. The questions that we asked were, when can we engage in, when do we have the luxury of engaging this process, which is kind of slow and deliberate, and it involves people kind of sharing and turn taking and perspective offering and all that, and it's a wonderful way of thinking about how it is that we can all really participate and be included in a process of discovery and exploration. And but it really is like there's no guaranteed outcomes, and it's a fairly like uncertain process. And certainly there are occasions where we just don't have that luxury. And so those are the questions about like, when can we do this? How can we do this? What is required? There I'm thinking about Wolf, 500 a year in a room of one's own, right? What are the material conditions that are necessary for us to be able to do this in the first place? And then what about those situations where we absolutely do need to make a decision? We do need to sort of like move forward. We need to persuade an audience, or we need to even force a proposal or something like that, right? There's certain contexts and situations where we don't really have that ability, that time that is required there. But certainly a provocative and interesting piece. And let's see, from there we moved into Ingram's essay on algorithms toward an algorithmic rhetoric. The key pieces there are this idea of algorithms make things matter, and that is how they are rhetorical, right? And so algorithms are all about, now here I want you to go back into Herrick in the chapter where he talks about a rhetoric of display. Is that chapter 12? I'm sorry, my Herrick's in my office. I'm not able to get it, obviously. And so there's that little tiny section, like a page and a half or so, where he talks about the rhetoric of display. And the way he talks about that idea toward the end, he talks about networks and infrastructures and so on. That connects really well with Ingram on algorithms and how they make things matter, right? And so this business of making things come into your vision, display, right? Like, what do you see? What are you attending to? All of that is the key business of algorithmic influence, right? And so screens and mattering, and here I'm thinking about Perelman and that theory of presence, right? Display, presence, mattering, they're all basically the same concept. Those things come together nicely there. So obviously the mattering business is important. What an algorithm is important. And then the three levels we can talk about algorithms, right? The macro, the meso, and the micro, okay? And then after that, Zarefsky is the key final piece, where we talked about democracy and the rhetorical culture of democracy and the two faces of rhetoric, the invitational, deliberative, and the manipulative or the engineering of consent, right? And obviously, when crucial decisions need to be made, you would really want that invitational, deliberative, slow, reciprocal process of turn takes. It sounds a lot like Foss and Griffin, really. And that is healthy and robust, and it's about us listening to each other and offering our best ideas. It's Aristotelian in this sense, and Isocratean too. And then we get into the other face of rhetoric, which is the more engineering of consent one. Pardon me. And that feels more Gorgianic. And maybe there's shades of Plato in there as well. But both the Platonic model and the Gorgianic model, don't forget, those are asymmetric and unilateral. Those are the ones where it's about kind of force moving toward the audience. In the Platonic model, it's supposedly coming from some ultimate higher source, and it's supposed to be for the good and the true and all the rest of it. But whoever really knows if that's actually the case, right? So the Gorgianic model is the one where, it's just about pure appearances and affecting things through, whatever works. And so I think of algorithms as Gorgianic instruments of making things salient, making them present and matter. All right, how am I doing here? Oops. Okay, so those are the readings. in terms of the readings, in terms of the priority, I think you probably get a sense of it, but it goes more or less Burke, Perelman. For me, it goes Ingram, Voss and Griffin, Zarefsky, and then the Descartes, Vico stuff, and Erasmus. All right, that's how you might think about the distribution of the questions. All right, so in terms of the concepts, abundance with Erasmus, that's just the kind of the use of style to create more and more possible forms of expression. And so there's an inventional aspect to style for Erasmus. Common sense, phronesis, prudence, that's more Vico type stuff. He's the one who's like, look, man, that's probabilistic, right? Common sense is probabilistic. It's more or less true. We don't have to be perfect here. We don't have to like that thing from Descartes of like, I'm only going to accept things if I know they're absolutely true. And if I doubt it for a second, it's gone. Vico would say, come on, dude, like that's not how we live together. Things are more or less true all the time. We can proceed, right? Neoplatonism, that gets to the Descartes stuff. That's kind of the revival of that certainty model. Imagination and myth, that's Vico's response to the certainty model, which is, you know, there's other things that matter. There's other things that move people. We need to think about bodies. We need to think about the passions, the imagination, the realm of the aesthetic and the passional. Subjectivity and social structure, yeah. You know, just the relationship between one's experience and how the world is shaped and ordered. That whole thing about Shakespeare's sister is quite interesting. Lines up nicely with Paysanne and sort of her analysis of courtly influence and how you deal with where you find yourself if you're a woman and what you're able to sort of work behind the scenes. Managerial rhetoric, that's this idea, we're not doing Spencer, that's this idea that what rhetoric does in the early modern period is it just manages truths that are found elsewhere by scientists and logicians. So it manages it, packages it, right? Adds a little bow, little bit of gloss, maybe some shimmer, and off it goes, management. Presence, we've talked about that one, that's mattering, that's salience. Thinking about rhetoric as making something more present, more immediate, more urgent, more salient. That's, again, what algorithms are doing, right? Starting points, those are sort of Perelman's, like where we begin from. His notion of adherence or liaison, that's very Aristotelian and Burkean in terms of identification. It's about that kind of mental connection between speaker and audience. So Perelman's definition of rhetoric as argumentation is the gaining or increasing of adherence between an audience and a set of propositions or premises, a set of ideas, right? So what do they think about the premise that, you know, students should be forced to come back to campus as soon as possible? Whoa, that's not a starting premise that I'm beginning with, right? So knowing where you're beginning is a way to reason for Perelman. Values is an important concept that moves through all of our 20th century readings, especially after Perelman, you know, well, all of them, I guess, right? We see this with Voss and Griffin, right? We see this with Ingram in terms of like how algorithms make things matter. What are your values? What do you care about? It's woven through all of it. Identification, I think we talked about that in class with Burke. That's his replacement of the notion of rhetoric as persuasion with rhetoric as identification. And it's a symbolic process of trying to align ourselves with each other. And it could be happening in ways that are not even conscious. So we're kind of doing this all the time. All right, so then the negative, we talked about that. That's one of the clauses, this concept of the like bad or, you know, not part of, excluded. A prison is a kind of negative space, right? It's like, go over there, go to your room, you know, being in the closet. These are all kind of concepts that line up with the negative. Bad, other, it's all part of the sort of our thinking and our expressions that give rise to this concept of the negative. So the deconstruction, language games, excluded discourse, power, and queer theory, that's all part of that chapter that we're not going to concern ourselves with. Again, these are really important concepts. And if you want to talk about them in the written stuff, by all means, go for it, but you're not going to be required to. The patriarchal dominant stuff, that gets back to Voss and Griffin Invitational. I think we're okay there. Algorithms, I think we're okay there. And then democracy, I think we're okay there. So I think that's about it, gang. Like I said, I'm going to now send out a Zoom link for when the class is set to begin at 11:30. And my suspicion is that very few will show up if anyone does. But again, if you want to just say hello, ask a question or two, it's just an opportunity for you to come by and say hi or get some clarification on anything if you wanted to. Beyond that, I'll still be around obviously for the next few days, but I got lots of grading, I got lots of writing stuff I'm working on, so things are really compacted right now. But if you want to set up a time to chat, we can do that. Please reach out. We have a little bit of time tomorrow. We have a little bit of time on Monday. And I could probably even, respond to emails and whatnot over the weekend as well. So let's rally ourselves for the last few days here, and let's try to finish strong. My heart goes out to all of us. I hope you are well. Do reach out if you have a special situation that you're dealing with. Otherwise, good luck with the studying, and any other messages will come through Canvas, I guess. All right. Peace, everyone. Take good care.